Welcome everyone, and we're here again at The Secret Life of a Student Athlete, and joined by the incredible Jacqueline Simoneau. Welcome to Jacqueline. And I'm Dana Dakik. Previously in my life was an international equestrian, and currently just an immunological postdoctoral researcher. My partner in crime, as always on the pod, is Jordan, also a PhD researcher at the moment and a Taekwondo fighter for Nigeria, and then joined by the fintech bro, Daniel. Part-time footballer, also signed up for a triathlon, so we've got the whole gang together. Welcome everybody. So Jacqueline, if I go straight to the reason we have you here, you do an incredible sport, a sport I don't know all that much about. You're in, is it artistic aquatics?
Artistic swimming, actually.
Swimming.
It used to be formerly known as synchronized swimming, but after the 2016 Olympics, they changed the name to make it supposedly more relatable to other artistic sports, such as artistic figure skating or artistic gymnastics. Per se.
A beautiful sport. It's one of my favorite to watch, because it's not something I've ever really come across in my life. So whenever, when they show all the Olympics on TV, it's the one that I almost always will go and watch. It's so cool. But could you tell me a little bit how you got into that as a sport and what kind of brought you into this world?
Of course. I also love watching equestrian, by the way. It's one of my other favorite sports to watch at the Olympic Games. One of my good friends has a bar in with lots of. So another favorite sport of mine. And initially growing up, actually, I always dreamed of going to the Olympic Games, watching it on TV, not per se for winning medals, but just for the fact of being there and the challenge along the way and the journey, really, becoming an athlete, a high-performance athlete. I started in artistic swimming because I truly love water sports. I always had the goal of going to the Olympic Games one day. Not for winning medals, but really just for being the best that I could possibly be and representing my country and the friendships along the way and striving to be, that 1% better every single day. I initially thought of many different sports I could potentially go to the Olympics with, whether that be equestrian or hockey, soccer. I loved so many sports, but I really had something for aquatic sports, loved being in the water. And eventually when I fell into artistic swimming, I loved the different aspects of it. Not many people know that our sport has different events. We have the team event where we're 8 in the water, so you really get to collaborate together as a team. Then you also have the duet event where you're 2 people in the water and you're really creating this strong bond, this partnership. And then you also have the individual event, the solo event, that's unfortunately not in the Olympics anymore, but it's still in the World Cup circuits, the World Championships. And I've had a privilege and the honor of representing my country in all 3 of those events, and really get to see the fun side of things. These are skills that I learned throughout these sports and these 3 events, and how to work together as a team to collaborate, but then also on a partnership level, and individually how to break down your big goals into smaller ones and achieve them one step at a time. So essentially, in a nutshell, that's how I got into the sport, is really just by watching it on TV, truly.
That's incredible. I think it's amazing, sort of how well-rounded it seems your childhood was in terms of sport, everything you potentially got to try. And I think that's such a testament to sort of the space you were in, the support you had. And then you could pick something that you were just so passionate about. And I love that for you. I wish that was, the case with so many people. That's such a nice sort of arc, a little storyline. It's lovely. But you said Olympics and you went 3 times. Some of us have dreamed to go to half an Olympic, let alone 3 Olympics.
Half an Olympic is crazy.
I just want to go. I honestly will volunteer and just I'll water go, So 3 Olympics is unbelievable. Do you have a favorite of the 3 that you went to?
Gosh, I just gave a presentation this morning. I had an off day at the hospital and clinic, and I gave a presentation to primary school, and I often get asked this question, and it's such a difficult question to answer.
I can imagine.
Because your first Olympic Games, you're there and you're truly living your dream. You're just soaking it all in. And yes, you're there, you're focusing on your performance, but you also get to take a small moment and just focus on just, wow, how far you've come and all the mountains you've climbed and overcome to get to this one moment. But then Tokyo is special as well during the COVID, in the stands. You mentioned volunteers, and volunteers are one thing that make the Olympic Games so special. Paris and Rio and Brazil, the volunteers were amazing. And we actually had the opportunity to interact with the volunteers, which is something that I really love, because they're volunteers that typically come from all around the world. So
yeah, true.
Right about that. But unfortunately in COVID and in Tokyo, the volunteers are really sweet. They made these little signs, but they weren't able to interact with us. We'd be on our bus on the way to compete at the Olympics, and there'd be volunteers on the side of the road just holding up signs saying either go Canada or go Japan. And
that's so sweet.
Really, really sweet. So that was neat to just feel connected in a different sort of sense for those games. But then Paris, I think, was definitely up there. It definitely battles, my first Olympic Games, for many reasons. These were potentially my last Olympic Games, and yes, we were focusing on the performance, and unfortunately we just fell short of a medal spot. So it was a little bittersweet in that sense, but I think what was really special is to be able to see all the friends that I've made along the way, there's partnerships in different sports. There's other members of my IOC Young Leader cohort that were there in Paris as well, and to be able to see them there and be part of this Olympic movement together really just does open up your eyes, and you could see how big the Olympic movement is. You don't need to be an athlete to experience the magic of the Olympic Games and the movement. There's so many different ways to get involved, and I think that last Games really captured that for me.
Yeah, I mean, it's such a good point. And often when we talk about why we even started this podcast, and you guys can jump in obviously at any point to back up what I'm going to say, but it's like the point of sport bringing everyone together. It's such a commonality, there's such common ground, and it's just such a hub. And I think that's why the world loves the Olympics, and kind of what you were saying about your 3 different experiences. I can imagine you were always also at 3 different sort of life stages, because it's such a big jump between the 3 that you just, I guess, experience them all differently. Did you have any sort of, I guess like haters is the wrong word, it's not a word I want to use, but did you struggle with that kind of side of things, having, I guess you're such a public figure, 3 Olympics, you obviously are then known, across 3 different, I guess across 12 years even. How was that to deal with?
Yeah, yes. Haters is a term that I don't quite like to use. I like to use it as people who challenge me, per se.
That's a much better way to put it.
And I started off very early on in my career when I first picked synchronized swimming. The sport has evolved quite a bit in the past 2 decades, but when I first started off, the perfect mold for our sport would be around 5'9", 6 foot tall, wow. Very flexible, typically a background in some sort of rhythmic gymnastics. And I didn't have any of that. I was 5'2", 5'3" when I maybe first made my Olympic team. And I wasn't very flexible. I came from powerful sports, hockey and soccer and track. So I didn't quite fit that mold. And when I first made the Olympic team, it just essentially how it works in my country is that we're 24 athletes competing for 8 spots. And I came in number 24 out of 24. So you're battling every single day. And I was 24. I was last out of the bunch. Not because of my physical capacities, all the physical testing, I'd be top in most things, in sprint and in the gym. But then that subjective component is something that I kind of lacked a little bit. The flexibility in the water, the artistry, and that's something that grew over time. And I had many people who challenged me, I guess, at that time and said, maybe it's best if you go back to some of the other sports that you picked. Already making it at that level, some people still said, maybe go back to diving, maybe go back to hockey. So that was one of the first challenges that I had at that point. And after that, once I overcame that, went through my first Olympic Games, won many medals on the international scene. Then you have this sort of expectation, I find, on yourself. You have this heavy weight that you're just lifting on your backpack and on your shoulders. And I'm sure all 3 of you must have felt that at one point in your careers. When you get to a certain point, people somewhat start to expect something from you. And you feel like all eyes are on you. And at that point, you feel like you're not able to make a mistake. And
the pressure's on them, hey.
Absolutely. And all 3 of you are high achieving individuals, I assume, already pursuing higher education as well as sports. I'm sure you put a lot of pressure on yourselves. And that's something that was difficult for me to overcome.
Diana definitely knows about.
It's not about me, guys. It's not
Yeah, do
about
you want
me.
to share some of that?
I mean, I think the point he's trying to make is I tried to do my
lot.
PhD, and yeah, I mean, it's just who I am. I overwhelm myself. I try and
So
do everything at the same time.
basically, like, if there is someone I know in my life that has done like everything she can possibly do at the same time, is Diana. She's a high achiever of high
This
achievers
is
for
not
sure.
advice. This is actually not advice. It's not advice. I think I just enjoy life, if I'm honest. Like, I think I enjoy life and I just take opportunities as they come, and it's not my fault they happens to have arrived at the same time, you know? So that's why when Jordan was applying for or thinking about applying for the ISC, he's like, should I do it? I was like, well, duh. Like, I don't know why you're asking me. Like, this is such a silly question. But you know, you were saying just now about having to deal with those challenges and really, like, I guess, self-motivate and make sure you could get through the pressure of all the things that you were trying to do at the same time and prove yourself, and the self-pressure and I guess to a degree I'm extrapolating from myself, but maybe doubt to some degree as well. And should you go back? But I think it's incredible that, like, it's such a big task to mentally, I think, push past those challenges. And do you feel that so much of that came sort of from your own drive and you're wanting to prove yourself and you're wanting to achieve, or do you think perhaps even both, you had a nice little support system built around you that could carry you through those moments?
Could I add one more question to
Oh, yes.
Diana's question? Sorry, I was just curious because you also mentioned the thing about expectations, and I feel like that's a different, because that's something I feel I kind of experienced when I started like competing internationally in Taekwondo. So it's like, okay, now when you compete at a national level comp, you're an international fighter, so you have to perform at a certain level. But so I was just curious how you dealt with, like, in addition to like what Diana said, like how you dealt with that aspect of like managing those like expectations, and you were still studying.
Yeah, absolutely. I think like all three of you, I still had, you know, aspirations academically, within sport and after sport.
And not just any, as in your academic aspirations are like how high can we go? The Olympics of academia, like.
It's the same with all three of you as well. But I think those expectations, I think were really coming intrinsically within myself. You know, if I looked within that support system that I had, my family and my partner and my loved ones, they didn't set any expectations for me whatsoever. And I think for me, that was always a really nice reality check, is checking in with my support system and that whether I win or lose or, you know, completely decide to pursue something else with my life, they would be there and support me no matter what. So that's when I think what I realized that those expectations were really just set, you know, within myself. And sometimes in the past, you know, young teenager me would worry what other people would think. You know, at that point, it was just wasting so much time and energy and focusing on things that I simply just can't control. And what I can control is what's in between my two ears and my mindset. And, you know, going back to your point, Dan, I'm simply just enjoying life. You know, if opportunities come up, why not go out and enjoy them to their fullest and focus on what I can control, my preparation, throw the expectations aside. What do I want to achieve out of this? And if I don't achieve that, that's okay, because I always want to learn something along the way.
Yeah, it's such an interesting perspective to hear from you, especially given sort of like, you know, you hear 3-time Olympian, and but when you hear some athletes speak, you know, and you know, just on every sort of platform or any sort of platform, so many of them speak so much about, you know, we must go harder, it must be, and it's always like big talk, right? Big fighting talk, and you seem to have almost done such an incredible thing by just enjoying it and really sort of like self-regulating in a way is what it sounds like. And it's a really refreshing perspective, I think, especially in this current sort of modern world where everything has to be bigger and better and higher, and you did all that without this layer of, I'm not even sure what to call it, it's just a different perspective to what I've normally heard from an athlete, and it's so refreshing.
And I think this also translates into academia as well too. I've noticed this shift, and you know, my mindset has shifted a lot over, especially my last Olympic Games in Paris, where I kind of threw all those expectations aside and really went into the experience to enjoy it to its fullest. You only live once. And I think that's when my results also came too. I became a world champion at that point too. And I was ready going into the world championships in Doha, going to be pleased no matter what, if I came last or if I came first. And I ended up winning the world championships.
Incredible.
which is fantastic. And I think that goes to show that without that pressure on the side, it really does help. Going back to the point of where it does translate into academia, my partner completed his PhD, and myself in podiatric medicine. They're competitive. If you're getting what we call pimped in the OR, so you're in the operating room and the surgeon's asking you a question as you're performing a very difficult, technical maneuver, and they're asking you a question. And at first, I find myself go back to my default mode, my adolescent self, and worry. What if I answer the wrong question? What if it's not complete? What if? And since my last Olympic Games, I've stopped worrying about that what if. And I found that the answers have just flowed naturally. I've excelled even more now on my clinical rotations, my surgical rotations, because I'm not worried if I say a wrong answer, if my answer isn't complete, because we're all learning. We're all learning. No surgeon is perfect. No doctor is perfect. Medicine is constantly evolving. And I think that's the beauty of it. When I came to realize that, we're all on a journey and we're all consistently learning. Don't be afraid to make mistakes. And I don't know if all three of you experienced that with your PhDs, and now you're Diana with your postdoc, but at least in Canada, I know it can be quite competitive, and you feel like you're never enough with experiments. You're never on track. Yeah. You're going to make it one way or another, and you're going to be learning along the way.
I think you're the person that has made me find the idea of doing a PhD appealing. Like Diana and Jordan are the only people I know that have done or are doing a PhD, and I'm like, that doesn't look good. But the calmness you speak with, and I guess it's something that you've kind of become accustomed to as you've competed and as you've studied. But you mentioned that you did academics whilst competing. So how did you balance these high level things?
Yeah, it was certainly challenging at first, until I found my groove. I was fortunate enough to, and at least in Quebec and in Canada, where I started off in sport, for primary school, I'd actually only do around half the day of primary school. So I'd go to school from 8 to 12, and then I would train and do my sport in the afternoon. And same thing for the most part of high school. So when I fit into that classic mold of what our system here has set up for us, there was no issue. But when I started to make my national teams and Olympic teams, our schedule was quite different. It didn't fit that mold of 8 to 12 school and then 1 to 8 p.m. training. So, training from 7 a.m. to around 4 or 5 p.m., sometimes later, if you have physio and massage and whatnot, how was I supposed to finish in my high school at this point? And that was what I really had to ask myself. Do I want to pursue, what do I want to pursue after sport? And I knew medicine was always one of my big goals, and becoming a doctor. So that's what kept me through those moments. I finished my high school learning the material by myself, going to school around 5 times just to write exams. But again, going back to Diana, that village and that support system, at that point, I also had teachers that were on board. And I think communication is key when it comes to that. And it's something that we learn through sport is you really have to set clear expectations for yourself and for your teachers, and being transparent. As soon as you know you're going to be gone for a World Cup or World Championships, or even no matter what level you may compete at, communicate that clearly with the teachers and, propose some solutions. Can I write this exam before or after? So it definitely was challenging, learning calculus on my own, learning organic chemistry when you're first starting off and you just have a textbook, and technology wasn't as sophisticated back then. There wasn't as many YouTube videos and tutorials. So it felt like banging my head on a desk a lot. But I think once you set your mind to something, at least I'm a person who's very stubborn in life. I will do anything I possibly can to achieve that goal. And yes, Jordan, no ChatGPT. No way. That did not exist back then. That would have been great, to just help me out. But that intrinsic motivation definitely helped me through. And then now going into the higher academic studies, pursuing my doctorate in podiatric medicine, it's a program that isn't typically quite flexible. There no athlete, at least no Olympic athlete in the past that have gone through this program successfully. They've either dropped out and pursued sport full time or dropped their sport and pursued their doctorate full time. And so I knew it was going to be challenging, but again, going back to that communication standpoint, I think if there's anybody listening to this podcast, communication is key, being transparent right from the get-go, sharing your goals and aspirations. And sometimes the school will actually enjoy being a part of that success. And every success that you bring that's part of your sport is also belonging to the school too, because they've helped you get there. They've enabled you to be able to give you that schedule to be able to pursue both at the same time.
Yeah, I mean, I would completely second everything you've just said about supportive teachers around you. So even sort of all through my sort of school career, I had a very similar experience, and the school, I didn't play a sport that I guess the school really necessarily cared about, but they acknowledged that I was doing something pretty cool. But then when I went to my continental games, I did that on my PhD. And if I had had a supervisor that wasn't keen or didn't care or was disinterested, I never would have been allowed to go. And then at that point would have had to probably just picked academics, because, you know, that's kind of the situation I was in at the time. So I think people forget that they need to kind of like just be a little bit malleable through this with us whilst we go through this. And, you know, it's only for a little bit of time. Just let us do our thing, you know.
Yeah.
Absolutely. I think it's super important too, picking your supervisor. And I don't know how it works in the UK or Europe, but in Canada, at least, I'd highly recommend people going to meet different supervisors and even going through a lab, talking to different people within the lab too, who are doing their postdocs, their PhDs and their masters, and seeing what the vibe is like in the lab too. Because I remember when I was doing research back in college, I needed to find a supervisor that was willing to be flexible. And I know it's gone on the World Cup circuit. And I went through 2 or 3. I went through a couple interviews, and I knew from the get-go, 2 of them were not going to work out, but one of them definitely was. And you get to kind of get a feel the more you meet different people and ask certain questions.
Yeah, I was gonna say that I feel like I'm currently obviously in that journey, because I've never had that. I've never had this experience before, and it's so interesting. So obviously I did sports like growing up, and Daniel can also speak about this. Like, but we did it in like in Nigeria. It's weird. We kind of play, and like you play football, but it's not like a super structured system. And then in undergrad, yeah, you're competing, but we mostly competed at a university level, and maybe you do like a national level. But when I started doing like taking taekwondo more seriously was actually my PhD. Well, I took it seriously before, but when things started like working out, it was like the second year of my PhD, and it was like a whole like shout out to my supervisors. Actually, like they've never had a student like me. So
request upon request with you.
Yeah, yo. So it's like, okay, cool, we're doing this, like, and my PhD, like, and they're really good and everything. And honestly, we've kind of figured each other out a lot more. And I realized that once they just kind of accepted that, okay, Jordan is doing this thing, and he's still doing the work, and he's doing this thing. When they let me do my thing, it gives me the freedom to come back and do the science as best as I possibly can. Because I don't know about you, if you have this, like I have this, like it's like an itch. It's like if I feel like there's something I need to be doing, even though like I know I need to sit down and do science, but there's like this unfinished business on the side. I need to go finish the business and then come back, and then it's like, okay, I can just like do the work. But if that's not completed, I find it so difficult to focus on like one thing. So yeah, I say like supportive supervisors, honestly.
Game changers.
Game changers, for sure. For sure.
Do you reckon that the competitive drive to be the best at what you do has also just shifted into your like education, your pursuits for your doctorate? Like, do you feel that kind of competitive drive when you're in the surgery or you're doing your rotations? Does that like come into your mind?
I think in the past, when I initially started, yes, 1000%. But I think I came to realize fairly quickly is that there's a certain subjectivity to things too. I mean, when you're doing exams in your undergrad or whatnot, sure. When you get a 99 or 97, sure, you're first, technically being the best by getting a 99. But in the operating room, in your clinical rotations, it's kind of like an art. Medicine is an art in its way, especially podiatric medicine. I have one supervising physician one day has a different approach for one specific pathology, and another one has a completely different approach, same, somewhat different result, but gets you to the same place. So there's no right or wrong, unless they do harm to the patient, obviously. But I came to realize fairly quickly that there's no winning. There's not trying to be the best that you could possibly be. And I think winning in our case is having patients that are ending up being pain-free, or at least getting them diagnosed early if it's a serious condition. Giving the best care for your patient. For me now, that's winning, a patient that is satisfied and can also understand. I think something that I've realized too is I've kind of realized this in the post-athlete transition career of now becoming a broadcaster and commentating. It's important to be able to kind of verbalize and kind of explain pathologies in lay languages to patients so they can understand. And the amount of patients that have been referred to us by different specialties and fabulous specialties, and maybe they just don't have the time to be able to understand, but patients come to us and we ask them, okay, what's your understanding of what you have right now? And being able to maybe just educate them a little bit more and using wording and language that they could understand and wrap their head around and understand what's coming next for them in this whole treatment plan. For me, that's a win, is being able to help patients not just nod and have a prescription, here you go, is to be able to understand what's going on and that they're better informed too.
That's true. That's really interesting. And when you come across, like in like your broadcasting, and when you come across like younger athletes who perhaps are trying to like balance education and competing, or they're just focusing on competing at a high level, what typically kind of advice do you give them?
It depends on the type of athlete I'm giving advice to and what their objectives are. But I think ultimately it comes down to your why. In Japanese, they have this saying called ikigai, which is your purpose. And purpose can shift over time. But my purpose was always showing up and being the best that I could possibly be in that given day, whether it be in the hospital, in the clinic, in the pool, in the field of play. Go out there and just be the best that you could possibly be. And enjoy the moment, I think, is the best piece of advice I could give. I mean, obviously it could be tailored to whatever the athlete needs in this specific case, but I think ultimately it comes down to just whether you have a hard day, that's fine. What matters is how you pick yourself up, and how you pick yourself up sometimes and to motivate yourself is that purpose. You have to know your drive. You have to know your why.